Radha. So the government and economic and social life under the Delhi Sultanate. So the state set up by the Turk towards the end of the 12th century in the North India gradually developed into a powerful and highly centralized state which for some time controlled almost the entire country, extending as far as Madurai. As far south as Madurai, the Delhi Sultanate disintegrated towards the beginning of the 15th century and a series of independent states were set up in different parts of the country. However, the administrative system of the Sultanate had a powerful effect on many of them and also influenced the Mughal system of the administration, which developed in the 16th century. The Sultanate. Although many of the Turkish Sultan in India declared themselves a lieutenant of the faith, that is, Abbasid Caliph at Baghdad, and included his name in the Kutubah, it did not mean that the Caliph became the legal ruler. The Caliph had only a moral position. By proclaiming his supreme position, the Sultan at Delhi were only proclaiming that they were part of the Islamic world. The Sultan's office was most important in the Sultanate, in the political, legal, and military authority vested in him. He was responsible for safety and security of the state. As such, he was responsible for administration and was also commander-in-chief of the military force. He was also responsible for maintenance of law and justice. He discharged his function. To discharge his function, he appointed judges. The Sultan acted as a court of appeal from the judge. The Sultan. The direct appeal could be made to him against the high-handedness of any of his officials. The dispensation of justice was regarded as a very important function of any ruler. We have referred to the stern manner in which the Balban dispensed justice, not sparing even the relation of the high officer of the state. Muhammad Tughlaq applied this even to the religious classes, ulemas who had previously been exempted from harsh punishment. Muhammad bin Tughlaq ने ulemas को punishment देने के लिए बोल दिया कि उनको वो भी punish होंगे. ठीक है. No clear law of succession developed during the Muslim rulers. Islamic theory adhered to the idea of election of the ruler, but accepted in the practice of succession of any son as a successful ruler. However, all the sons of the ruler were considered to have an equal claim to the throne. The idea of primogeniture was fully accepted neither to the Muslim nor to the Hindu. Some rulers did try to nominate one of the sons, not necessarily the eldest, as a successor. Iltutmish even nominated a daughter in preference to his sons, but it was for the nobles to accept such a nomination. While Muslim opinion generally adhered to the idea of legitimacy, there was no safeguard against the usurpation of the throne by a successful military leader, as happened more than once in Delhi Sultanate. This military strength was main factor in succession to the throne. However, public opinion could not be ignored. For fear of public opinion, the Khilji could not dare to enter Delhi for a long time after disposing the successor of Balban, but built a new town called Siri. Central administration. The Sultan was assisted by a number of ministers who were chosen by him and remain in office at his pleasure. The number, power, function of the minister varied from time to time. A different function of the administration, a different system of administration developed towards the end of the 13th century. The key figure in administration was the Wazir. In the early period, Wazir was primary military leader. In the 14th century, the Wazir began to be considered as more an expert in revenue affairs and presided over a large department dealing both with income and expenditure. Muhammad Tughlaq paid close attention to organization of revenue department. His Wazir Khwaja Jahan was widely respected and was left in charge of capital. Muhammad Tughlaq went out to deal with rebellion. A separate Auditor General for scrutinizing expenditure and an Accountant General for inspecting income worked under Wazir. Although quarrels between different officers hampered the smooth functioning of the department, the revenue department under Muhammad MBT was able to cope with the affair of the largest empire that had come into existence in India since breakup of Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire के बाद में MBT में सबसे largest आया. Khan Jahan converted a Tailung Brahmin who was chosen by Firoz Shah Tughlaq as his Wazir enjoyed full authority in the revenue department. His long spell of 18 years as Wazir is generally considered the high water mark of Wazir's influence. In accordance with Firoz's policy of making office and Iqtas hereditary, Khani Jahan was succeeded as Wazir by his son Khani Jahan II. The attempt of Khani Jahan II to play kingmaker after that of Firoz and the failure of the attempt resulted in setback to the Wazir's position. The importance of the Wazir could revive only under Mughal. The most important department of the state next to the Wazir was the Diwan-e-Arz or military department. Diwan-e-Arz. The head of this department was called the Arz-e-Mumlik. The Arz was not commander-in-chief of army since the Sultan himself commanded all the armed force. In those days, no king could have survived on throne if he entrusted the chief commander of armed force to someone else. The special responsibility of the Arz department was to recruit, equip, and pay the army. Radhe. It was Balban who first set up a separate Arz department in India. He and later Balban ने पहला जो है separate department रखा Arz department. He and later Alauddin Khilji paid close attention to its working. Alauddin insisted upon a regular muster of the armed forces. He also introduced the branding system, Dag, of the horses, so that the soldier may not bring horses of poor quality to the muster. A descriptive role of each soldier was also maintained. The army was posted in different parts of the country, a strong contingent remaining with the ruler in the capital. Balban kept his army in good trim by making it march over long distance on the pretext of undertaking hunting excursion. Of all the Delhi rulers, Alauddin had the greatest standing army. सबसे ज़्यादा इसकी थी Alauddin की. The strength जो है इसकी 3 लाख थी by Barani ने बताई, which appeared to be an exaggeration. Alauddin जो है also the first Sultan who paid his soldier full in cash. Earlier the Turkish soldiers had been assigned a number of villages in the Doab for payment of the salary. पहले तो ज़मीन देते थे, villages देते थे. These soldiers had begun to look upon these assignment as hereditary and were not prepared to give up their post, though many of them had become too old and feeble to serve. Balban tried to resume these holding by modified his order due to the early agitation created by these soldiers and the pleading of his old friend, the Kotwal of Delhi. But Alauddin abolished these holding by a stroke of the pen. He paid 230 tenkas to the trooper and 78 tenkas more to one who maintained 2 horses. The efficiency of Alauddin's army was the main factor in his ability to contain the Mughal invasion while conquering the Deccan at the same time. तो मुगल को भी हरा रहा था और वो डेक्कन को भी कैप्चर कर रहा था. Turk also maintained a large number of elephants which were trained for war purpose. The Corps of sapper and miner was also attached to the army for clearing the road and removing the obstacle for the march of the army. The Turks and the Afghans predominated in the cavalry, which was considered prestigious. The Hindus was employed both in cavalry and infantry at the time of Ghaznavid. Acha. The Asia continued to be employed but largely in infantry in subsequent period. There were two other important departments of state: Department Risalat and Diwani Insha. The former dealt with religious matter, pious foundation, stipend to deserving scholars, men of piety. It was presided over by Chief Sadr, who was generally a leading Qazi. He was generally also the Chief Qazi. The Chief Qazi was the head of the Department of Justice. Qazi was appointed in various parts of the empire, particularly in those places where there was a sizable Muslim population. The Qazi's dispensed civil law based on Muslim law Sharia. The Hindu were governed by their own personal law, which were dispensed by panchayat in the village and by the leader of the various castes in the cities. Criminal law was based on regulation framed for the purpose by the ruler. अच्छा, criminal law जो है, जो ruler regulation बनाता था, वही था. Diwani Insha dealt with the state correspondence. अच्छा, all correspondence, formal or confidential, between the ruler and the sovereign of other state and with his subordinate officials were dealt with this sub-department. There were a number of other departments in addition to these. The ruler posted intelligence agents like Barid in different parts of the empire to look into, to keep them informed of what was going on. Only a nobleman who enjoyed the fullest confidence of the ruler was appointed as chief Barid. The ruler's household was another important department of state. It looked after the personal comfort of the sultan and requirement of the large number of women in the royal household. It also looked after a large number of karkhanas, or department in which goods and articles needed by the king and the royal household were stored. Sometimes these articles were manufactured under royal supervision. Firoj Tughlaq had set up separate department of slave, many of whom were employed in these royal workshop. The officer in charge of these activities were called Wakil-e-Dar. He was also responsible for maintenance of proper decorum at the court and placing noble in their proper order of precedence at formal reception. Firoz also set up separate department of public work, which built canals in many of his public buildings. Local administration. When Turk conquered the country, they divided into a number of tracts called iktas, which were parceled out among the leading Turkish nobles. अच्छा, तो इक्ता बना दिया, फिर वो nobles को देते थे. The holder of these offices were called muktis or walis. तो ये जो जिसको भी देते थे noble, जिनको मिला है उसको mukti और walis बोलेंगे. It were these tracts which later become province or subas. अच्छा. At first, the muktis were almost independent. They were expected to maintain law and order in their tract and collect land revenue due to the government. Out of the money they collected, they were expected to meet salaries due to the soldiers and keep the balance. As the central government became stronger and gained experience, it began to control the muktis more closely. It began to try to assert the actual income and to fix the salaries of the soldiers and the mukti in cash. The muktis were now required to remit to the center the balance of the income after meeting the expenditure. The auditing of the accounts, which took place after a couple of years, was often accompanied by harshness, including torture and imprisonment of muktis. These were relaxed by Firoz Shah Tughlaq towards the end of the Sultanate. Below the province were shiks and below them जो है परगना, मतलब province फिर province के नीचे शिक होगा, शिक के नीचे परगना हो जाएगा. We don't know much about the administration of these units. We are told that the village were grouped into units of 100 or 84, traditionally called Chaurasis. अच्छा, this must have been the basis of Pargana. The Pargana was headed by Amil. The most important people in the village were the Khut, landowners, and Mukaddam or headmen. We also hear of village accountant or Patwari. अच्छा, village accountant कौन है? Patwari. We do not know how exactly the village was administered. It was perhaps not interfered with as long as it paid the land revenue due from it. In the initial stage, hardly any changes were made in the working of the administration at the local level. Land revenue continued to be collected in same manner, more or less by same set of people. This must have been a major factor in the Turks establishing their authority in the countryside quickly. The changes have mentioned began from the time of Alauddin Khilji at the beginning of 14th century, and they led to conflict, including peace and disturbance. Economic and social life. We have very little information about the economic condition of the people under the Delhi Sultanate. The historians of the period were more interested in the event at the court than in the lives of the ordinary people. However, they do sometimes tell us the price of commodities. Ibn Battuta, a resident of Tangier in North Africa, वो Tangier में North Africa में रहता था Ibn Battuta. तो Ibn Africa Ibn Battuta बगल में जो था क्या होता है फुर अफ्रीका में visited India in the 14th century and lived at the court of Muhammad Tughlaq. ठीक है, Muhammad Tughlaq NBT. तो IBT for 8 years. He traveled widely all over the India and has left very interesting account of the product of the country, including fruit, flower, herbs, the condition of the road, and life of the people. We have some other accounts also. The food grains and the crops, the fruit and the flower mentioned by these travelers are familiar to us. Ibn Battuta says that the soil was so fertile that it could produce 2 crops every year. Okay. Rice being sown 3 times a year. Achha, sesame, sugarcane, cotton were also grown. They formed the basis of many village industries, such as oil pressing, making of jaggery and weaving. Peasants and rural gentry. As before, peasants formed the overwhelming majority of the population. The peasants continued to work hard and to egg out bare subsistence. They were recurring famine and war in different parts of the country, and these added to the hardship of the peasant. All the peasants did not live at the level of subsistence. The village headman Mukaddam and the small landlord Khuts enjoyed a higher standard of life. In addition to their own land holding, they had land for which they paid revenue at concession rate. Sometimes they misused their office to force the ordinary peasant to pay their share of land revenue also. These people were prosperous enough to ride on costly Arabian and Iraqi horses, wear fine clothes and behave like member of upper class. As we have seen, Alauddin Khilji took stern action against them and curtailed many of their privileges. Even then, they continued to enjoy high standard of life than the ordinary peasant. It seemed that after death of Alauddin, they were able to resume their old ways. A section which enjoyed a high standard of life were the Hindu Rayas or autonomous Rajas, many of whom they continue to hold their previous estate. There are a number of references to the visit of the Hindu Rais or Rais to the court of Balban. There is little doubt that these Hindu Rais continued to be powerful even in area under the direct control of Sultan of Delhi. Trade, industry, and merchants. With the consolidation of Delhi Sultanate and the improvement of communication, the establishment of a sound currency system based on the silver tanka and copper dirham, there was a definite growth in trade of the country. अच्छा, silver tanka and copper dirham. CD हो जाएगा CD, copper dirham CD, silver tanka, ST, SC हो गया, ठीक है. This was marked by the growth of the town and town life. Ibn Battuta called Delhi as the greatest city in the eastern part of the Islamic world. अच्छा, he says that Daulatabad, Devgir equal Delhi in size and index of the growth of the trade between the north and the south. The other important cities of the town were Lahore and Multan in the northwest, Kara and Lucknow in the east, and Bhilwara, Patna, that is Patna, and Cambay, that is Kambayat in the west. A modern historian says that on the whole, the Sultanate presents a picture of flourishing urban economy. Such an economy must have necessitated commerce on a large scale. Bengal and the towns in Gujarat were famous for their fine quality fabric. Cloth of the fine quality was produced in other towns as well. Cambay in Gujarat was famous for textile and for gold and silver work. Sonargaon in Bengal was famous for raw silk and fine cotton cloth called muslin later on. There were many other handicrafts as well, such as leather work, metal work, carpet weaving. Some of the new craft introduced by the Turks include manufacture of the paper. The art of manufacturing paper had been discovered by Chinese in the 2nd century. It was known in the Arab world in the 5th century and traveled to Europe only during 14th century. The production of textile was also improved by the introduction of spinning wheel. Cotton could be cleaned fast and better by use of cotton carder bow, that is dunya. But there is little doubt that most important was the skill of Indian craftsmen. Indian textile had already established their position in the trade to countries on the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. During this period, the fine Indian textile was introduced to China as well, where it was valued more than silk. India imported high-grade textile satin from the west. Import करता था satin को West Asia से, glassware and of course horses. तो West Asia से glassware, satin और horses को लेता था, India import करता था. From China, it imported raw silk and porcelain. India's foreign trade, both overland and overseas, was truly an international enterprise. Although the Arabs were dominant partner in the Indian ocean trade, they had by no means ousted the Indian trade with Tamil and the Gujarat, both Hindu and Muslim. The coastal trade and the trade between coastal port and the North India was in the hands of Marwaris and Gujaratis, many of whom were Jain. The Muslim Bohras merchant also participated in this trade. The overland trade with Central and the West Asia was in the hands of Multanis, who were mostly Hindus, and Khurasans, who were Afghani-Irani, and Khurasins, who were Afghani-Iranians. Many of these merchants had settled down in Delhi. Gujarat and Marwari merchants were extremely wealthy, and some of them, particularly the Jains, spent large sum for the construction of temple. Cambay was a great city in which many wealthy merchants lived. They had lofty houses built in fine stone and mortar with tilted roof. Their house was surrounded by orchards and fruit gardens which had many tanks. These wealthy merchants and the skilled craftsmen lived a luxurious life and were accustomed to good life and good food and clothing. The merchants, Hindu and Muslim, were attended by pages bearing swords with silver and gold work. In Delhi, the Hindu merchant rode horses with costly draping, lives in fine houses, and celebrated the festival with great pomp and show. Barani tells us that Multani merchants were so rich that gold and silver were to be found in abundance in their house. The nobles were so spent with thrift that every time they wanted to hold a feast or a celebration, they had to run to house of the Multanis in order to borrow money. In those days, travel was also risky due to robbers and dacoit and various marauding tribes. However, the royal roads were kept in good shape, and there were many sarais on the way for the comfort and safety of the travel. In addition to the royal road from Peshawar to Sonargaon, Muhammad Tughlaq built a road to Daulatabad. There were arrangement for the post being carried quickly from one part of the country to another. Post carry करने के लिए. This was done by relays of horses, or even more efficiently and quickly by runner who were posted every few kilometers in towers which were built for the purpose. The runner continuously clanged as a bell as he ran, so that the man on the next relay may be able to see him from the tower and get ready to take his burden. We are told that by means of these relay, fresh fruits were obtained for the Sultan from Khorasan. When Muhammad Tughlaq was at Daulatabad, which was 40 days' journey from Delhi, he regularly used to receive the Ganga water for drinking purpose by means of these relay. Economic life was quickened in the period by improvement of communication and the growth of trade, both overland and by sea. The Turkish introduced or popularized a number of new craft and technique. We've already referred to use of the iron stirrup and large-scale use of armor, both for horse and the rider, for heavy and light cavalry preferred by the new ruler. This led to the growth of metallurgy, industry and the metal craft. Even more important development was the important improvement of rahat, that is miscalled the Persian wheel, rath, acha, so that water could be lifted from deeper level for irrigation. The other craft included paper making, glass making, spinning wheel, and an improved loom for weaving. Mention may also have been made of the introduction of superior mortar, which enabled the Turk to erect magnificent building based on the arch and domes. Not all these crafts were new, but their expansion and improvement based on the legendary skills of the Indian craftsmen and agriculture growth were two of the most important factors which made the second half of the 14th century a period of growth and relative affluence. Sultan and the nobles. Sultan and chief nobles enjoyed a standard of living which was comparable to the high standard in the world at that time, based to the standard of ruling class in the Islamic world in West and Central Asia. While Europe was still trying to overcome its backwardness, the opulence and the wealth of ruling class in the Islamic world was dazzling and set a standard which the ruling class in every country tried to emulate. Like the Hindu ruler, almost every sultan in India built his own palace. Balban had a dazzling court which was designed to impress and strike a sense of awe in the heart of visitor. Alauddin Khilji and his successor followed the same tradition. The palace of Muhammad Tughlaq had been described by Ibn Battuta. A person who wanted to visit the Sultan had to pass through 3 lofty gates, which were heavily guarded. He then entered the court of 1,000 pillars, which was a huge hall supported by polished wooden pillars and was decorated with all kinds of costly material and furnishing. This was the place where the Sultan held his public court. Muhammad Tughlaq used to present two robes of honor, one in the cold and other in the hot season, to each of his noble. It has been estimated that he thus represented 22 lakh robes every year. These robes generally consisted of imported clothes, velvet, damask or wool on which brocades, velvet and costly material was used. They must have cost an enormous sum. Numerous gifts used to be bestowed on the noble and other on such festive occasions as the Sultan's birthday, the Nowruz, Persian New Year and the annual coronation day. The royal Karkhana, which we have referred to earlier, catered to all the needs of the Sultan. They manufactured costly articles made of silk, gold and silverware. They were also a store of choice and rare good. The superintendent of store were instructed by Firoz Tughlaq to buy finely finished articles wherever and at whatever price they were available. It said that on one occasion a single pair of shoes for Sultan cost 70,000 tanka. Most of the articles of the royal were worked in gold and silver, embroideries and jewelries. The store also catered to the haram. Almost every sultan had a haram containing queens and a large number of women from various countries. A large number of servants and slaves, men and women, were employed to safeguard them and to look after their comfort. All women relation of the sultan, including his mother, aunts, also lived in haram. Separate accommodation had to be provided to each of them. The noble tried to ape the sultan in ostentatious living. They had magnificent palace to live in, and they used costly articles of apparel and were surrounded by a large number of servants, slaves, and retainers. They vied with each other in holding lavish feasts and festivals. However, some of the nobles also patronized men of art and letter. Alauddin sternly repressed the nobles, but the gay mode of life revived under his successor. मतलब उसने nobles को suppress कर दिया अलाउद्दीन ने, पर उसके बाद में successor थे वो थोड़े खुश से थे. The nobility came into its own under the Tughlaq. नहीं the nobility came into its own under the Tughlaq. Due to the rapid expansion of the empire, large salary allowances were given to nobles by Mughal Muhammad Tughlaq. We are told that his wazir enjoyed an income as large as that of the province of Iraq. The other leading ministries got 20,000 to 40,000 tanka a year. The chief Sadr getting 60,000 tanka a year. Khane Jahan, the wazir of the Firoz Shah, used to get 15 lakh. Ore bhai. His son and son-in-law, who were very numerous, got separate allowance. During the Tughlaq period, a number of nobles were able to bequeath large fortune. Thus, Bashir, who was Firoz Arz Mumlik, left 13 crore at his death. On the ground that Bashir had been originally his slave, Firoz confiscated most of his wealth and distributed the rest among his son. This may be regarded more or less an expectation. The property of the noble was generally safe and was allowed to pass on to his son. It was this section which brought land on which they built garden, orchards, market. The Sultan and his noble took keen interest in improving the quality of fruit in India, especially melons and grapes. In this way, a new type of landed gentry began to develop. The breakup of Delhi Sultan towards the beginning of the 15th century halted this trend. Radhe Radhe. Then in town life, slave artisan and other. We have already referred to the revival of town life under Sultan. The Turkish ruling class were essentially an urban ruling class with a taste of town life. Many of the towns grew around military garrison as provider of food, good and service to them. In due course, many of them emerged as cultural center. The medieval towns had a miscellaneous population, including many lesser nobles and large class of clerks for running government office, shopkeepers, artisan, beggar. The post of clerk and the lower government officials had obviously to be given to the people who could read and write, since the work of teaching was largely in the hands of Muslim theologians, that is ulema. The ulema and the lower officials tended to think and behave alike. Most of the historians were drawn from this section, and their writing reflect the opinion and prejudice of this section. Beggars who generally wore arms like the ordinary citizen, formed a large mass and could sometimes create a problem of law and order. Another large section the town considered of slave and domestic servants. Radha. क्या हो गया? Radha. Another large section in the town considered of slave and domestic servants. Slavery had existed in India as well as in West Asia and Europe for a long time. The position of different type of slaves, one born in the household, one purchased, one acquired, and one inherited, is discussed in the Hindu Shastra. Slavery had been adopted by Arab and later by Turks also. The most usual method of acquiring a slave was captured in war. Even Mahabharata considered it normal to enslave a prisoner of war. The Turks practiced this on a large scale in their war and in and outside India. Slave market for the men and women existed in West Asia as well in India. Turkish, Caucasian, Greek, Indian slaves were valued and were sought after. A small number of slaves were also imported from Africa, mainly Abyssinian. अच्छा अफ्रीका से Abyssinian लेके आते थे. ए हो गया. Slave were generally bought for domestic service per company and for the special skilled slaves or comely boys and handsome will sometimes fetched a higher price. Skilled slaves were valued and some of them rose to high office, as in the case of slave of Qutbuddin Aibak. Firoz Tughlaq also prized slave and collected about 180,000 of them. Many of them were employed in handicraft, while others formed Sultan's personal bodyguard. The largest number of slaves were, however, used for personal service. Such slaves were sometimes treated harshly. It can be argued that the condition of slaves was better than that of domestic servants because the master of the former was obliged to provide him food and shelter, while a free person may starve to death. Slave was allowed to marry and to own some personal property. However, it was widely accepted that slavery was degrading. Giving a slave his or her liberty was considered a meritorious act, both among Hindu and Muslim. In general, foodstuffs were cheap for townsfolk during Sultan's period. We have mentioned the price of foodstuff under Alauddin Khilji. In his reign, about 15 kg of wheat was sold at 7.5 jital, barley for 4 and rice for 5 jital, with 50 jital being equal to a silver tanka. Price rose sharply under Muhammad Tughlaq but declined almost in Alauddin's level under Firoz. It is possible that this may have been due to extension of cultivation during his reign. It is difficult to compete the cost of living in town. A modern historian has estimated that during Firoz's reign, a family consisting of a man, his wife, a servant, and 1 or 2 children could live on 5 tankas for a whole month. Thus, for a lower government official or a soldier, living was cheap. But this does not apply to artisan and worker in the same way. Even after Akbar, an unskilled labourer earned 2.5 to 3 rupees a month or even less. Even under Akbar Shah. In terms of their income, the living condition of the artisan worker in town appear to have been hard. Thus, medieval society was a society of great inequality. This was reflected in the Muslim society even more than in Hindu. The later, being predominantly rural, where inequalities were less marked. In town, the Muslim nobility led a life of great ostentation. Some of the wealthy merchant Hindu and Muslim also led life of ostentation. The great mass of the people in town as well as in the countryside lived a simple life and often had to face many hardships. It was, however, not a life without a joy. A numerous festivals, fair, etc. Relieved to some extent the monotony of their lives. Caste, social manner and custom. There were hardly any change in the structure of Hindu society during the period. Smriti, writer of the time, continued to assign a high place to the Brahman while strongly denouncing the unworthy member of the order. According to one school of thinking, the Brahmins were permitted to engage in agriculture, not only in times of distress but also in normal times, since officiating at sacrifice, etc. did not furnish means of subsistence in Kali age. The Smriti text continued to emphasize that punishing the wicked and cherishing the good was the duty of Kshatriya, and that right to wield weapon for the purpose of protecting the people likewise belonged to him alone. The duties and occupation of Shudras and their disabilities were more or less repeated, while the highest duty of the Shudra was the service of other caste. He was allowed to engage in all occupation except to deal in liquor and meat. The ban on study and recitation of the Vedas by Shudras was repeated, and not on hearing the recitation of the Puranas. ठीक है, मतलब पुराण सुन सकता है वो, पर वेद नहीं सुनेगा. Some writers go as far as to say that not only eating Shudra's food but also living in the same house with him, sitting in the same cot and receiving religious instruction from the learned Shudra were also to be avoided. Achha. This may be regarded as an extreme view. However, the severest restriction was placed on mingling with the Chandal and other outcasts. Achha. Chandal के साथ में नहीं मिलेंगे. There were little change in the position of women in the Hindu society. The old ruler enjoying early marriage for girls and the wife's obligation of the service and devotion to the husband continued. An element of the marriage was allowed in special circumstances such as desertion, loathsome disease, but not all writers agree with this. Widow remarriage is included among the practice prohibited in the Kali age. Huh? But this apparently applied to 3 upper caste only. तो widow remarriage होती थी 3 upper caste में होती थी. Regarding the practice of sati, some of the writers approve it empathetically, while others allow it with some conditions. अच्छा. A number of travelers mention its prevalence in different regions of the country. Ibn Battuta mentioned with horror the scene of a woman burning itself in the funeral tray of her husband with great beating of drums. According to him, permission from the Sultan had to be taken for the performance of sati. Regarding property, the commentator uphold the widow's right to property of a sonless husband. हैं? अच्छा, अगर बेटा नहीं है तो विडो रखेगी, अदरवाइज बेटे के पास प्रॉपर्टी जाएगी पति की. प्रोवाइडेड द प्रॉपर्टी वाज नॉट जॉइंट, दैट इज हैड बीन डिवाइडेड. अच्छा, द विडो वाज नॉट मेयरली द गार्डियन ऑफ दिस प्रॉपर्टी बट हैड द फुल राइट टू डिस्पोज ऑफ इट. अच्छा, ये बेच भी सकती थी. दस इट वुड appear that the property right of women improved in the Hindu law. During this period, the practice of keeping women in seclusion and asking them to reveal their face in the presence of outsider, that is the practice of parda, became widespread among the upper class women. तो पर्दा जो है वो women में इस टाइम पे बहुत ज़्यादा हो गया upper class women में. The practice of secluding women from the vulgar gaze was practiced among the upper class Hindu, मतलब गंदी नज़र से बचाने के लिए upper class हिंदू में पर्दा रखते थे. And was also in vogue in the ancient Greece में भी ये सब थी. The Arabs and the Turks adopted this custom and brought it to India with them. अच्छा, तो पहले ईरान ग्रीस में थी, फिर अरब और टर्क्स ने अडॉप्ट कर लिया, फिर इंडिया में लाए. ओके. Due to their example, it became widespread in India. Achha. Particularly in North India, the growth of parda had been attributed to the fear of Hindu women being captured by invader. In an age of violence, women were liable to be treated as prize of war. Perhaps the most important factor for growth of parda was social. It became a symbol of the higher class in society, and all those who wanted to be considered respectable tried to copy it. Also, religious justification was found for it, whatever the reason it affected women adversely and made them even more dependent on women. During Sultan's period, Muslim society remained divided into ethnic and racial groups. We have already noticed the deep economic disparities within it. The Turk, Iran, Afghan and Indian Muslims rarely married with each other. अच्छा, एक दूसरे में शादी नहीं करते थे. In fact, these sections developed some of the caste exclusiveness of Hindu. तो ये भी exclusive रहते थे. The converts from the lower section of the Hindu were also discriminated against. जो मुस्लिम convert हो गए थे उनको भी discriminate करते थे. The Hindu and Muslim upper class did not have much social intercourse between them during this period, partly due to the superiority complex of the later, and partly due to the religious restriction of the intermarriage and interdining between them. The Hindu upper caste applied to the Muslim. The restriction they applied to the Shudras. अच्छा, हिंदू upper caste जो मुस्लिम पे वही restriction लगाते थे जो कि शूद्र पे लगाते थे. But it should be borne in mind that the caste restriction did not close social interaction between Muslim and the upper caste Hindus and the Shudras. मतलब social interaction फिर भी चलता था सभी में. At various times, Hindu soldiers were enrolled in Muslim armies. Most of the nobles had Hindus as their personal manager. The local machinery of administration remained almost entirely in the hands of Hindu. अच्छा, this occasion for mutual intercourse was manifold. ठीक है. The picture of the two communities being confined within themselves and having little to do with each other is thus neither real nor one which could be practiced. Nor is it borne out by the evidence available to us. Conflict of interstate as well as difference in social and cultural ideas, practice and belief did, however, create tension and slow down the process of mutual understanding and cultural assimilation. These will be dealt with in a subsequent chapter. Nature of the Sultan, nature of the state. The Turkish state in India was militaristic and aristocratic. The Turkish noble tried at first to monopolize the high office of the state, denying a share to the Tajiks, Afghan and other non-Turkish migrants. The nobility acquired a broader base under Tughlaqs. However, noble birth still remained a very important qualification for high office. The vast majority of the Muslim as well as the Hindu had therefore little opportunity for occupying high office of the state. Of course, Muslim in the town had a better chance of being enrolled in armies and getting state employment. But rather, the Hindu dominated trade and constituted the rural aristocracy and lower administrative wings. Without those, cooperation in the state could not function. A kind of tacit sharing of power between rural Hindu aristocracy and the city-based administrator was thus a factor of capital importance for Delhi Sultanate. Of course, there was frequent fight between these various sections. Though often given a religious color, the basic cause of the struggle between them was secular, such as fight for power and land, or rather for the share of the surplus produced by the land. Since land was not generally sold in those times, the Muslim also fought among themselves for these objectives. In formal sense, the state was Islamic. This meant that Sultan did not allow any open violation of the Islamic law and appointed Muslim divines to profitable office to the profitable office of the state and granted revenue-free lands to many of them. However, the Sultan did not allow Muslim divines to dictate the policy of the state. We are told that during the reign of Iltutmish, a party of Muslim divines approached the Sultan and asked them to enforce the Muslim law strictly, giving the Hindu the option of only Islam or death. Acha. On behalf of the Sultan, his wazir told the theologians that this was impractical and impolitic, since Muslims were so little in number as salt in dish of food. The Sultan had to supplement the Muslim law by framing their own regulations. That is, Zawawit. Alauddin Khilji told the leading Qazi of the city that he did not know what was lawful or unlawful but framed law according to the needs of the state. This is why the historian Barani refused to consider the state in India as truly Islamic, but one based on worldly and secular consideration, Jahandari. As for the Hindu subjects, from time of the Arabian invasion of the Sindh, they had been given the status of zimmis or protected people who accepted the Muslim rule and agreed to pay tax called jizya. तो उनको मुस्लिम रूल को एक्सेप्ट करना था और जिजिया पे करना था जो कि टैक्स था. दिस वाज रियली अ टैक्स इन लिeu of military service and was paid on a graduated scale according to means, women, children and indigent who had insufficient means being exempted from it. The Brahmins also remain exempted, though this was not provided for in Muslim law. At first, jizya was collected along with land revenue. अच्छा, land revenue के साथ में करते थे. In fact, it was difficult to distinguish jizya from the land revenue since all the cultivators were Hindus. ठीक है. Later, Firoz, while abolishing many illegal cess, made jizya separate tax. अच्छा, तुम land revenue अलग दो, 10,000 land revenue दो और 20,000 का ये jizya दो. He levied on the Brahmins also. अच्छा, Brahmin भी दोगे. Sometimes the theologian who were in charge of the collecting it tried to use it to humiliate and harass Hindus. However, jizya by itself could not be a means to force a Hindu to convert to Islam. In general, it might be said that medieval state were not based on the ideas of equality but on the position, but on the notion of privilege. Before the Turks, the Rajput and to some extent the Brahmins formed the privileged section. अच्छा, Turks से पहले Rajput और Brahmins privileged थे. They were replaced by Turks. फिर उसके बाद में Turks privileged हो गए. Later, the Turks and others, including the Iranian, Afghan and narrow group of Indian Muslim, formed the privileged section. ठीक है. Muslim theologians were also a part of this privileged group. For the larger bulk of the Hindu who were not included in the privileged group earlier, this change did not affect their daily lives, which continued in the same manner as before. Thus, while claiming to be Islamic, the state was militaristic and aristocratic in character. Religious freedom under Sultan. The extent of religious freedom accorded to the non-Muslim under Delhi Sultan may be seen in this context. In the early phase of the conquest, many cities were sacked and the temples formed a special target partly for justice, partly to justify the conquest and partly to size the fabulous treasure they were supposed to contain. During this period, a number of Hindu temples were converted to mosques. अच्छा, the most notable जो है is Khawat ul Islam Mosque near Qutub Minar. Formerly, it had been a Vishnu temple. Khawat ul Islam Mosque. Qutub Minar के वहाँ पे जो mosque है. अच्छा. In order to convert it into a mosque, the inner sanctum, which contained the deity, was pulled down, and in front of it a screen of arch containing inscribed verses of the Quran was put up. Pillars from many temples were used to put a cloister around the courtyard. The courtyard remained more or less intact. This was done in the number of other places, such as Ajmer. But as soon as the Turks were settled, they started building their own mosque. Their policy toward temple and the place of worship of Hindu Jains rested on the Muslim law, Sharia, which forbade new place of worship being built in opposition to Islam. But it allowed the repair of the old temples. अच्छा, नए नहीं बनेंगे पर old को repair कर सकते हो, since building cannot last forever. अच्छा, this meant that there was no ban on erecting temples in the village, since there was no practice of Islam there. अच्छा, मतलब village में temple कर सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे Islam नहीं था. Similarly, temples could be built within the privacy of home. घर में बना सकते हैं. But this liberal policy was not followed in times of war. War में नहीं होगा. Then the enemy of Islam, whether human or God, were to be fought and destroyed. In times of peace, however, within the Turkish territory and those areas where the Rajas had submitted to the Muslim rule, the Hindu practiced their religion openly and ostentatiously. According to Barani, Jalauddin Khilji observed that even in capital and province center, the idols were publicly worshipped and the text of Hinduism publicly preached. The Hindus passed beneath the wall of royal palace in procession, singing, dancing, and beating drums to immerse the idol in the Yamuna, and I am helpless, he said. Despite the pressure of a section of orthodox theologians, this policy of broad toleration was maintained during Sultan through with occasional slaps, though with occasional lapses. Sometimes prisoners of war were converted or criminals exempted from punishment if they accept Islam. अच्छा, Firoz जो है executed a Brahmin for abusing the Prophet of Islam. On the other hand, there are some instances of conversion of Muslims to Islam to Hinduism. अच्छा. Thus, Chaitanya, the great Vaishnava reformer, converted a number of Muslims. The theologian of course considered apostasy from Islam to be a capital crime. On a whole, conversion to Islam were not affected with strength of the sword. If that was so, Hindu population of the Delhi region would have been the first to be converted. The Muslim ruler had realized that Hindu faith was too strong to be destroyed by force. Sheikh Nizamuddin Ali, the famous Sufi saint of the Delhi, observed, "Some Hindu know that Islam is a true religion, but they do not embrace Islam." Bahraini also said that attempt to use force had not effect on Hindu. Conversion to Islam were due to hopes of political gain and or economic advantage, or improve one's social position. Sometimes when an important ruler of or a tribal chief converted, his example was followed by a subject. The Sufi saint too played a role, though they were generally unconcerned with conversion and welcomed both Hindus and Muslims to their discourses. The saintly character of some of the Sufi saints create a receptive climate for Islam. There is no evidence, however, that large number of persons belonging to lower castes embraced Islam due to the discrimination against them in Hindu society and to the influence of Sufi saints. Conversion was thus due to personal, political, and in some cases to the regional factor, as in the Punjab, East Bengal. Following the Mongol invasion of the West Asia, many persons belonging to the prominent Muslim family fled to India. There was also a steady influx of Afghan into India. Many of them enrolled themselves in Turkish armies or were engaged in trade. A further influx of Afghan took place in the 15th century under the Lodi ruler. Despite this, a number of Muslims in India remained comparatively small. The nature of Hindu-Muslim relation and the cultural attitude of the two, which will be examined in the subsequent chapter, were conditioned by the situation. Radhe Radhe.